hello, everybody, and welcome to it's August 19th, another edition of Seconds Out Live. I am your host, Ayman Khan, stepping in for Danny Flexen, whose birthday it is today. Happy birthday to Danny Flexen. Usually, what we do is we come to you guys in the chat. We come to Josh Green, who's also in the seat as well, two co-host seat. He's beaten Josh Hart to the co-host seat too. They had a box off. We pitted them against each other, and Josh Green came out the winner. But we're gonna calm the introductions for the moment, and we're gonna praise Danny Flexen for a moment. It is his birthday. Josh Green is important. I'm not important. The chat isn't even important either. So I've created this little bit of a compilation video just to highlight our very own Danny Flexen, who's having a well-deserved rest as it is his birthday. So Vinny, I know you've created this package. It took you a while to get it all sorted, get it all done together, and you slaved away creating this. But Vinny, if you could show us the birthday video, we'd much appreciate it.
Could it possibly be the long-lost brother of Ayman Khan? I don't know what's going on here.
I've had a small haircut and
Pay £10 million if he pulls out for a second time. I'm not saying it's Fury's fault he got cut either, but what I'm saying is, why has Usyk got a penalty levied against him? What if he gets cut in sparring? He has to just lose £10 million for the first time it happens. That doesn't seem fair. So I think that's a big part of it, is kind of erratic nature, rather than the fact that he doesn't take boxing seriously as a general rule. Ambient Warrior, Stitch Duran has said that cut can be pretty well managed if it were to open up again. That will be reassuring, I guess. I mean, Fury's obviously coped with a pretty bad cut in the Otto Valiant fight, so he's not, unaccustomed to it. Mesh very well finally answered the question of who is better. I think that's one that if we ran a poll, it would be almost 50-50. They've got as many backers, both in boxing and in the fan base as well. Absolutely amazing fight. I'm looking forward to that far more than I am AJ.
I love the little jazz ensemble in the background. Josh, we'll bring you back in now. Good to see you. Do you enjoy that little homage to Danny Flexen? Danny Flexen.
Absolutely. We bow down to His Flexcellency on his birthday, taking a well-deserved day off. But I'm sure he will be tuning in at a later date to SO Live to review our performances. So we've got to be talking boxing and plenty to get our teeth into this week as usual.
Plenty to get our teeth into, indeed, including some Turkey, that being some of Turki Al-Sheikh's biggest moves and shakes and talks of conversation surrounding the fights that he wants to make in the lieu of Crawford versus Canelo possibly not being made. For now, we'll see if negotiations arise later on down the line. Should Canelo get through Berlanga, maybe that will open the door again for those conversations that get to some of the chats. And if you haven't already, click the like button, subscribe, share as well too across Twitter and social media as well. We're on TikTok as well, so if you like TikTok, you can watch us on that platform too. There's a lot of people in the chat as well. I see the names Team in there, Richard Stone Island, the pros in there too, Paul Daniels, the big dog, not the small dog, don't do any small dogs here, Carl Franklin, Arise Champion, DB Cooper 1 is in here. DB Cooper 1, good to see you again. Luke 1999, Henry Bassi, How Not to Play, and RH16_Den. Clickbait is one of the questions in here by Sunset. Nope, it's not clickbait. This conversation has arisen from, we're talking about Anti-Joshua versus Tyson Fury being next, right, from an interview that was done by the Stomping Ground with Turki Al-Sheikh. Spoke for a long time about the fights that they wanted to make, and Turki Al-Sheikh said he wanted to make, regardless of the outcomes or regardless of what would be next for him, he wanted to make next that big fight that Britain has been craving for, that being Joshua versus Fury. Hold on that for a second, Josh, because I want to come to you, because it seems like when promoters have come together in the past and they try to make fights and we get conversations about the fights, about Joshua versus Fury or Joshua versus Wilder in the past, we get, oh, this fight is 80% done, 85% done. Now it's up to 93%. It's 99% done. And then when it comes to the deadline day, the fight falls through and we don't get it. But with the inclusion of Turki Al-Sheikh over from Saudi Arabia, and the influence and the money, most of all, involved that he brings, everyone can be catered to. All promoters can be catered to. The fighters get their pay, and now the fights are being made. Have you welcomed over Turkey's influence into the game, making these fights, and is it for the better of boxing?
I think as a fan, you have to welcome what we've seen over the past year or so with the fights that are being made. It's hard to sort of disagree with the fights that we're seeing, not just on the huge shows out in Riyadh, but sort of week to week, I think the fights over in LA and what we're going to see in Wembley in just over a month's time, those sort of events, not just the main events, but the undercard as well, they would have been separate cards, and maybe we'd have seen them split over the place of maybe 6 to 9 months. But we've got these big fights on the same cards, and it's really hard to argue with what we're seeing as a boxing fan. Now, the next big step for him is, as you say, to make that Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua fight. Many have tried, and they've all failed so far. The extra ingredient as such is the additional payment that they will be receiving. You'd imagine that the paychecks that would be received by AJ, should he come through Daniel Dubois, and Tyson Fury, should he defeat Alexander Usyk, would be absolutely astronomical and far bigger than they would have been just over a year ago when we were a little bit closer to making that fight. So maybe that extra ingredient is there. Maybe the fact that Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn seem to be on terms of making fights, good terms maybe. And we'll just have to wait and see if the fighters can do their job and come through the fights, and maybe we will get that matchup. But I think we're probably in a better place financially and promotionally to make that happen. But it's now just up to the fighters to see if they can get the job done, and that fight will be as close as it's ever been.
Josh, just to keep on you for a moment, would it, or do you think it would have happened had Turki Al-Sheikh not been in the picture?
I think I don't think that fight happens without Turkey, if I'm honest. We've been, I mean, how many times have we been there? 3-4 times. I know there was the time, I think it was it May last year, where we seemed to be 80% or so towards getting that fight done, and suddenly the plug was pulled, and that was a fight that it wasn't in the thinking of the promoters. We've seen the back and forth from AJ and Tyson Fury over the years, and I think there's a lot of harm and a lot of scar tissue that can come from that. I think when a fighter has been in negotiations multiple times to get a fight over the line, and it's not happened time and time again, I think there will certainly be thoughts in their minds, if the financial deal isn't right, if they want to go through all that again and not get the fight. So look, the financial deal is going to have to be right for both of them. And if there's any man that can stump up the money, it's Turki Al-Sheikh. But to answer your question, without Turkey, no, I don't particularly think the fight happens.
Well, let's get to some of the fights that could be in the offing. We're running a poll here. Which fight do you want to see the most? Option 1 is Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua. Option 2 is Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford. The wheels have sort of slowed up on that one. The other fight is Jonathan Davis versus Devin Haney, or another fight. And if you're picking this option for another fight, let us know in the comments as to what fight that is that you want to see that we've not listed there. So that's your votes and voting options there, which fight you want to see the most that can maybe get over the line with that Saudi influence. Let's get to some of the comments in the chat before we talk about those fights individually. We have here in the chat, scrolling up all the way to the top. Mind me one moment. Fury's legs have gone, says Michael M. Johnny told me. Johnny who? Got to be more specific than just Johnny. Richard Stony Island. I wonder what he wears. He says Sir Joshua. I don't know what that means. Sir Joshua, maybe hankering for him to get an honor of some form. The pro Joshua turns him to food. Well, it depends what side of the coin you land on, because a year or so back we'd say Fury was madly in the ascendancy and Joshua was, on the way out. But now maybe the pendulum has shifted as to where we view Fury to be the one who's got a lot of questions to answer. Magic Beams. Fury's fighting Usyk. Joshua's fighting Dubois. What's this shit? It's next. That's why it says next on their Magic Beams. Get with the program. Paul Daniels, he agrees. Get with the program as well, Paul Daniels. Lol, British Box Media keeps forgetting about Usyk for sure. No, we're not forgetting about Usyk. All, of course, Tyson Fury has to get in front of Usyk and win that fight. But it says here, Turki Al-Sheikh has made it clear that he wants to make Fury versus Joshua after their next fights. Hence why I'm saying next. So once Joshua comes through the picture with Dubois, win or lose, and even Fury as well too, win or lose, both of them will be matched up together, it appears to be. We'll find out soon enough as to whether that's the case, but that's what we're talking about here for the moment. DB Cooper One says, this is nothing new. Turkey has said for ages he wants AJ versus Fury, regardless of the Fury versus Usyk rematch outcome. It's interesting as to why Fury versus AJ has always been that diamond for any promoter or any manager to push forward to a fight that fighters understand is that top level fight that they want to see. And Turkey's recognised that that's the crown jewel, but pending for Usyk's thoughts, who wonders where he's in the mix as to what his next option is, what his big fight is after that. It probably is another dance with a Fury, another dance with Anthony Joshua, because the comers at heavyweight aren't quite there right now, or maybe dropping back down to, as he said before, cruiserweight to claim the cruiserweight undisputed titles again. That big fight isn't quite there. We've seen it with Usyk now, but we've never seen Joshua versus Fury. Let's hope we don't get it too late. Luke 1999 is with the program. AJ knocks out Fury within 6 rounds. Do you guys agree? Let me know. Amazed how idiots above don't know the context of the title. Keep up. Appreciate you saying that, DB Cooper One. Let's play with that quickly though. Josh, Fury versus AJ. Who are you favoring at the moment?
It's a real tough one at the moment on the back of their recent performances. The form obviously favours Anthony Joshua, but you've got to look at the opponents that are in that recent form. Otto Wallin, albeit a very good fighter, but he's not really a world beater. Francis Ngannou's not a boxer. Robert Helenius. I mean, if he beats Daniel Dubois convincingly, then I think there's certainly a case to pick him to beat Tyson Fury. But a lot will depend on what happens in the Fury-Usyk rematch. I fully expect an Usyk win in the rematch, by the way. I think Usyk will improve even more. I think he's a fighter that learns from his fights. I think he's an incredibly smart fighter. And I fully expect Usyk to get the win over Fury, and I think a knockout is certainly on the cards for Usyk in that rematch. But as far as Fury versus Joshua goes, you know what? I probably do favour Joshua at the moment. I'm not really sure where Fury sort of lands after his defeat to Usyk. And yeah, I mean, AJ looks like a revitalised fighter under Ben Davison. He certainly looks incredibly aggressive. I spoke to one of his sparring partners, Peter Kadiru, just last week, and he was very bullish on what he's been seeing in the gym. And he's been in 5 AJ camps over his years. I think dating back to when he was previously supposed to be fighting Fury and dating back a number of years. I can't quite remember when his first camp was, but he believes that this is the best AJ he's ever seen, and if this is the best AJ that he's ever seen, I think he does hold an advantage over Tyson Fury. But we'll have to see how they both get on against Dubois and Usyk respectively.
Appreciate that one from you, Josh. We've got here, where's the other skinny one? I don't think it means Danny Flexer, no offense, Danny. I think he's referring to Josh Hart. Josh, like we mentioned there, Josh Green won the box off between the two resoundingly. We call him lean, mean Josh Green, but you can't understate the mean part of Josh Green because he's definitely mean with the right hand and the right hook. And unfortunately, Josh Hart suffered the fate of defeat. But he will be back. He'll dust himself off, and Josh Green is the one that won the hot seat for this week. Fury retires after defeat to Usyk. Fight never happens. Fury's ego is far too fragile to take a potential loss to AJ. Happy 50th birthday to our Lord and Savior, His Excellency. We are indeed not worthy. Big Chunga says, Ayman Khan is so hench. I bet he drinks a lot of protein shakes. You would think that would be like, oh, how do you know? How do you know? But Big Chungus, I've sussed your identity. You're going to have to come up with some better trolls to keep it funny here, Big Chungus. But appreciate you in here nonetheless. 8 beautiful, 8 golden, 8 dragon, 8 Danny Sun and Capote are the goats. We appreciate that from you. Rahokam, short term, yes, but long term, he's a problem. Not in our interest. This is a petty authoritarian state, gets control of the sport. Thunder Road. Danny was in the club celebrating his birthday, looking for girls at closing time. And looked, Asante sprawled out at York Hall. Well, Hokum says, also, it seems the three biggest stars Canelo, Tank, and Inoue have resisted, so the money on offer is only great for the average earners. Yeah, there does seem to be a separation between some of the athletes that essentially need the money. Although you probably say, you don't know, I don't know how much Inoue has earned, or at least I don't think the figures have been released either. Gervonta is someone who, if he's not at Floyd money by now, but he's on the road towards that Floyd Mayweather money pretty soon. So I'd imagine he understands that he doesn't have to be beholden to anyone other than working with the promoters to get the money that's been put on the table, as with Canelo as well. I think Canelo specifically is an issue that has to do with, and he said it himself, the way that they do business. I think the way that the Saudis do business is 100 miles an hour. This is our schedule. Let's speak now. Let's put this in the diary for later on, and go. We can announce it, whatever. And Canelo in this situation was more like, well, hang on, actually, I want to deal with Belanga, and then I'll talk about fights, and I don't want to do anything else. And that's the friction there, as opposed to any friction of money being banded around or the way that business is done in terms of the actual business of the deal. It's just the business of the schedule right now. So I don't think it's going to be a fight. I don't think it's a bridge burnt at the moment for Canelo. But Tank and Inoue are definitely cases where we've not seen them, although they've been talked about. Tank was supposed to be having a fight in the UK. That was mooted at the start of the year. And Inoue as well, too, was someone who's apparently going to feature in the UK and has still not done so, although he was in Scotland, wasn't he, for the WBSS. I like Turki, but he's getting too big for his boots cocky lately. His PR team is to calm down, trying too hard to be Eddie Hearn, making it about himself. Yeah, I think I saw there was a poster to say the face of boxing. Can we run through AJ and Tyson Fury resumes? It's a new subject we haven't explored yet. Gary, tongue-in-cheek, very funny. How not to play Chisora versus Wilder. Thunder Road, 60 watching, less than 25 likes. Let's hit the thumbs up chat. No slacking just because the supply teacher is here. Who, me or Josh? Josh, which one of us is the supply teacher here?
I feel like you're the supply teacher here. You're taking the role of Danny Flex, and you're reading the comments. So I think I'm the student in this scenario.
Fury is fighting Usyk. Yes, we know Agni Kai never dies, whoever Agni Kai is. Turki can't make Tank versus Shakur or Canelo versus Bird Benavidez, so his power has been exaggerated. John Wick, there was something a bit boring about boxing just now. Not enough characters floating around for me. I get what you mean, John Wick. There's definitely a bit of frustration as to some of the fights being made, even though there is talk about this money being pumped in and this ability to get fights over the line. It's not quite as it's not quite as fast. And I think what it is because a lot of promoters are kind of happy to wait around for the Saudi money because they don't have to. They're not in control. They don't have to push as much or make these fights. They can just wait for Saudi to call the shots. And what should happen is there should be a trickle-down effect of cards where essentially those fights are being paid for. So the money that's being saved on that part is spent on the fights that we usually get, the lesser fights, the lower cards. But we're getting a bit more kind of next-gen cards. We're getting still Catterall Prograde, which feature a good fight at the top, but then elsewise on the undercard, there wasn't all that much there. And it's those sort of kind of nights where you don't get those big fight nights, and it kind of hurts the UK domestic scene. Some of the biggest, I think last year started off with a huge fight in the form of Baturbia versus Yard. I think the biggest fight this year so far has been Wardley versus Clarke, which is a great fight, but you need more nights like that, more kind of big events like that to really kind of get the feeling amongst boxing fans that it's happening. Just that's not just with the Saudi scene. It's very much a thing where you can't overlook your own domestic obligations here. Joshua can't lose as too much at stake, and then he'll take care of Fury. Crawford versus Ennis. Appreciate that one from Haley's Vomit. Is that like a play on Haley's Comet? Halley's Vomit? I don't know. Also, Josh, shut that kitchen cupboard door. It's annoying. Josh, shut that kitchen cupboard door. It's annoying. DBQ1. Mark my words, Joshua wins by stoppage, says Marlonius. MB, I feel like Fury has 1 foot outside of boxing now. The momentum is with Joshua. Momentum, a key word there. You absolutely deluded, Raheem. Just ditched it up before you were in the channel. We all know Tyson B. Usyk is next. Cully, I think you've missed the mark here. Don't worry. You've got time. We're still here. We're going to run for another half an hour or so. You've got time to pick up with the schedule and understand that the conversation was surrounding that Fury versus Joshua would be next, regardless of the results of their current fights in front of them. Paul Daniels is with us, though. Dubois will cause an upset. He beats Joshua. Usyk beats Fury again. Joshua Fury still happens as there's too much money for Fury to ignore. And they both retire. Boom. Goodbye, Fury. Thank God Paul Daniels isn't a fan of Fury. Paul Daniels, I'll ask you as well, too. What do you think should happen? Do you think Fury should stick with his father being in the corner? That is a topic of contention as well, too, heading into that big rematch. Derek Chambers also extends out his happy birthday to Flanny Dexon. Flanny Dexon, never heard of that guy. I've heard of Danny Flexon. The other big fight to talk about is Canelo versus Crawford. One fight that it was being played with now, and currently at the moment the switch has been made towards not Canelo Alvarez but Gennady Golovkin. But was there appetite from you, Josh, to see this pound for pound showdown between Canelo versus Crawford? We know that it would have been a case of Crawford having to jump up to super middle where he wasn't, he's kind of looking like he's at his limit at 154 with how close that fight with Majmov ended up being there, but he did come through with the victory. But Crawford versus Canelo. Do you think we'll end up seeing that later on this year or the start of next year?
I think the ship sailed on that. Canelo is a very stubborn character. And I think once he's made his mind up on something and once he's settled what he's going to do, I can't see him going back on those decisions. So, I don't see him sort of shaking hands with Turki and letting those conversations be bygones. So he's got plenty of options on the table. He doesn't need to rush himself. We know the amount of money that he's made his career, an absolutely incredible amount of money, and he can do that against people that he believes are, and obviously the boxing public believe are, pretty, I don't want to say easy fights, but they're certainly slanted well in his favour. People like Edgar Berlanga, or if it was to be someone like a Diego Pacheco next, or previously, I know Munguia gave him a good fight, but I'm sure he was well compensated for that. And he was a fairly heavy favourite going into that one as well. So I'm not sure that he will be pushed back in the direction of something like a Crawford fight. There is some trepidation there, despite the obvious chasm in weights that we've got between those two. I think it would pose a real different test for Canelo Alvarez, probably a test that he hasn't seen in quite some time, whilst he would obviously carry a significant power advantage and a significant weight advantage going into the fight. I think there would be problems against Crawford that he hasn't seen for a little while. The agility, the speed, the reflexes may be a little bit different to some of the super middleweights or the middleweights that he's fought over recent years. So there was certainly some interest in that fight from me. I think you just have to look at the differences in the two fighters, the differences in the styles, and it's a really interesting style matchup. And Terence Crawford's an incredible fighter, multi-weight world champion, and it would have been interesting to see how he would have been able to bridge that gap, what he would have been able to do in camp, what his physique would have looked like on weigh-in day and on fight night. So there was certainly some interest in that from me, but the fights that I'd really like to see Canelo have are the same fights that I think everybody wants to see him have: the Benavidez fight and the Bivol fight. The Bivol rematch goes missing so often of the time when you're talking about Canelo Alvarez. Everybody wants to see him against Benavidez, but that Bivol fight, I mean, it seems although that's not a fight that he's interested in at all either, and maybe he's reached the position in the weights where he can't compete at light heavyweight, and he hasn't got the advantages at light heavyweight, and maybe we won't see those fights up there. But maybe the next best option is a Crawford fight, but I don't think he's going to go back on what he said over the past few weeks, and that's not one I think we'll get, unfortunately.
Cheers for that breakdown there, Josh. Jump back to the chat. It says Thunderbolt says, Ayman, would you apologize to Jerry Forrest for misquoting him in your interview thumbnail? Jerry clearly said Boy is a big thick guy, but you clickbaited with something else. First of all, my intention is never to clickbait anything. I'm pretty sure I heard the quote that I was putting in the title, although I'm very happy to listen to that back. And if it is Dubois is a big thick guy, we'll go with that with his title. Or but the beauty with speaking to someone like Jerry Forrest, as I have done beforehand, is there are a lot of quotables and a lot of headlineable um, options from Jerry because he's a very good interview. So yeah, it wasn't my intention to clickbait at all, but I definitely heard the current title. But I'm happy to look through that interview again, and if it's the case, change that, no problem at all. Really do not like the term haters. I don't hate it, but I do believe John Fury should be banned from ringside, consider his disgusting behavior within the boxing community. Fury has a good corner. It seems to be the case that Fury is sticking with John Fury, Sugar Hill, and Andy Lee for now. That chaos has worked for him in the past. We'll see if it works with him in the rematch with Alexander Usyk. The other big fight that's going to be talked about as well, too, as we move on, is contest, no contest, because it ended up being a no contest the first time round off of the back of Ryan Garcia failing a PED test. Turki Al-Sheikh has said that he wants to make the rematch with Devin Haney, but it won't be after having made accommodations for Ryan Garcia. He'll have to serve out his ban and he'll have to prove that he's clean to get that fight with Devin Haney. The right way to have this fight, this rematch, Josh, if it's going to happen, and who are you favouring in the rematch should they meet again?
Yeah, if that rematch is to happen, absolutely, we need complete proof that Ryan Garcia is clean. And I think I'd like to see Ryan Garcia in a much better mental space. I wouldn't be keen on seeing that fight again if he's acting a similar way to what he did in the lead up to the first fight. A lot of people sort of read into that, into the act of Ryan Garcia, as something to get under the skin of Devin Haney. But I think what we've seen since then, that's just the mindset and the mental state that Ryan Garcia is currently in and has been in for a little while now. And I don't think that's a particularly safe way to be, even if you're in a position to get a win over a fighter of Devin Haney's quality. And yeah, I just, if that rematch is going to happen, I think he does need to be in a much better place. As far as a prediction goes, I'm going to have to edge towards Devin Haney, just because we don't know. It's a little bit of an unknown with Ryan Garcia whether he can do the same job, carry the same power, carry the same sort of performance when he is 100% clean. Devin Haney's a magnificent fighter, as is Ryan Garcia, but I don't think Garcia's fought on quite the level that Haney has fought. That I was incredibly shocked. Waking up the next morning, I didn't watch the fight live. I rewatched it in the morning. When I woke up in the morning and saw the result and saw the aftermath of that fight and that result. So I don't expect that to happen again. And it's a long time away for Ryan Garcia. I'm not currently sure what he's up to, whether he is in any sort of training. But to come back from a significant ban and face somebody straight away of the quality of Devin Haney, I think it would be probably a mistake from Ryan Garcia's team and his side. And I don't expect them to jump straight back into the rematch with Haney. But if they are to do so, I would be voting the way of a Devin Haney win on that one.
Yeah, I mean, Haney seems very much into it. Like he's very much obviously fuming at Ryan Garcia for failing the drugs test, but also very welcoming of having that rematch, no contest, whatever you want to call it, but another bout with Ryan Garcia down the line. And I think it's an acknowledgement of essentially that's the fight that sells for both of them right now because at welterweight, stepping up that weight, there really isn't many options as to big fights to have at the weight. Crawford, since exited, is not going to come back down. You've got Boots Ennis, who's there, but there's talk of Boots Ennis stepping up to 154 to take on Terence Crawford. So how long will Boots decide to stay there? It seems like he'll stick around, and there's an opportunity for him to, collect all the belts there as well too. That's a wide open division which doesn't have the stars of what it did, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when you had like Pacquiao, Khan, Danny Garcia was in there, Marquez was in there, lots of names. Keith Thurman was in there. All that type of level, like top level, and then like even below it as well too. You had good fighters who can mix it up, and on their day they might pick up a win, like Salom Peterson and things. But otherwise, you're kind of looking at like Mario Barras holds a title, good fighter. Brian Norman Jr. has since been elevated. I think Boots has got to take on his mandatory again, which is Chikadze, a rematch of that fight, and then Conor Ben's around too, and he does command a bit of spotlight, as does Errol Spence Jr., but we don't know Spence Jr. isn't going to return at that weight either, and is he going to return full stop? We don't know, but then the names and fights aren't there, and that's why I think Haney's really much, really kind of pushing for that fight. It's waiting for super lightweights like Haney and Garcia to jump up from that division into welterweight to fill it out there, and outside of those two, and Teofimo Lopez as well getting up to welterweight, which I'm sure will be inevitable as well. Those at the moment, it's just not a thriving division that it once was. So that's, I think, why as to those two are kind of destined to do it again. But I imagine Hagel would want some assurances that there's extra testing being done on Ryan Garcia, and that there's a fair level playing field with that as well too, that he makes the weight as well, and doesn't fluff the weight this time round. Jumping back to the chat, DB Cooper 1 says Devin Haney needs to ditch his old man far more than Fury does. Garcia is a clown, but Haney's game plan was awful, pinged by Garcia's one and only shot all night. Ryan Garcia disrespected Muslims, and Turkey will reward him with a Haney rematch on one of his cards. Guess his comments can better sell the fight. Money is truly all that matters in this world. Salute Ayman, Josh, and the chat. Salute to you, Toby Bartlett. That's a good point. There's some what's the word here? Reparations that Ryan Garcia will have to do. Whether he's already done them kind of in the background, whether it's kind of an acknowledgement by the people around him, and people who talk to him as to his behavior was because of what he was going through in the whirlwind that was surrounding him. It's kind of got quiet now with Ryan Garcia. The storm has sort of subsided, and hopefully he's getting that help that he quite clearly needed. And whilst I'm not making excuses for him, I can sort of understand that some of the comments might be because you aren't in the right mind that you're in, but there's still the need for a sincere apology to be given for those actions, and then some form of reparations for that. Although he did have a bit of a funny little jibe over. I don't know if you saw this, Josh. Devin Haney got into an altercation at like a fairground. Have you seen that, Josh?
Haven't seen this one. No, we'll have to catch up on that one.
The long and short of it, Josh, is Devin Haney got into an altercation in his team at a fairground. I don't know the full details of it, but Haney threw a punch, and Garcia mocked him because the guy who received the punch stayed on his feet, and Haney said that Garcia said that he couldn't knock out that guy either. So I think Ryan Garcia is very much in fight mode as well too, thinking about a potential fight in the future with his rival. DB Cooper 1 says, what exactly is his flexibility up to? Doesn't strike me as a guy who celebrates his birthday. Who doesn't celebrate their birthday? Who would have thought SO was like a trendy startup that gives you the day off on your birthday? Oh man, it's probably just for Danny. We could only dream of having days off on our birthday. We have to work. No, I'm just kidding. Danny's very much well earned a day off from Seconds Out Live. So happy birthday once again to Danny Flexen. But we are the gift here, as opposed to any actual material presence from us. Moving on to our next topic, and that's a big one. That is Wardley versus Clarke 2, fight of the year potentially again. Two heavyweights at that level, looking to kind of climb up the ladder towards the top, will most likely have to fight each other on the way to the top if they're going to get there. Fabio Wardley was looking at potentially the European route. Frazer Clarke had only one thing in his mind and was sort of happy when I had conversations with Frazer. Look, he said, look, if the fight doesn't come next, I know it will happen in the future because me and him have kind of made this rivalry into something more than it just being the one-off type of fight. But he acknowledged it would have been a bit of a shame if that fight didn't happen. Fabio seemed to be someone who had a bit more options about him, and is happy to move on with his career. But this is a big fight, one that's probably been talked about and banded out to be sold on one of these Real season cards. Whether that's been the indicator and the thing that's really pushed it over the line to happen, we'll find out soon. But very much like the first fight was a standalone fight and could stand on its own type of card. Hopefully we'll see it in the UK as well too. But Wardley versus Clarke, the first fight was a great one, Josh. The second one, will it be just as good? And do you think that Clarke might now have the edge over Wardley as he's been in the ring with him again? Or can Wardley, who's also working with Ben Davis and who's also sparring, must be with the likes of, or learning off the likes of Joshua in that gym too, Moses Talma, another one will be hot on his heels as well. Will that competition rise Wardley up again to maybe a conclusive victory this time around?
Yeah, it's another tough one to call, but I think you have to look at the way the two fighters have improved over the last couple of years. The trajectory of Fabio Wardley's career has been very much an upward sort of sequence. He's got better and better as the opposition's gone up in standard. And Frazer Clarke's a difficult one. He's sort of in a position in his career where, I mean, personally, I think he's probably reached his peak. I don't know how much more there is to achieve for Frazer Clarke beyond winning a British title against Fabio Wardley. I can't remember how old he is, 31, 32. But the world titles seem a long, long way off for someone like Frazer Clarke, whereas Fabio Wardley, in the position he's in, with the experience he's had, they're not too far away. You say that European title could be something that he's looking at early next year, possibly. And then the world level opportunities start to open themselves up. So I would expect Fabio Wardley to go in there and get the job done in a second fight against Frazer Clarke. I think he will have learned a lot from that first fight, as will Frazer. And I think it'll be an excellent fight again. I think there's very little in doubting that. It was an incredible fight first time round. I thought it would be good, but I didn't think it would be that good. And I would expect similar sort of action the second time round, although Wardley will not want to take quite as much damage early on so that he can maintain that gas tank into the later rounds. And hopefully for him, be a little bit more dominant in his later rounds. He looked a little bit ragged, and that did cost him later on and could have cost him the result in the end. So I fully expect Wardley to have learnt from the first fight. Same goes for Clarke, but for me, Wardley is the man to watch there, and the man to watch for the next couple of years as well, as he sort of continues his ascent.
Was it your fight of the year, Josh, so far? I'll just give you some other names of some big fights that have happened this year. Haney versus Pauls 2 was a good back and forth fight where Pauls got the finish in the end. Wardley versus Clarke was a great fight. You also had Chisora versus Joyce, which is all action, just crazy back and forth, rock'em sock'em affair with Chisora, the underdog, coming out the victor and dropping Joyce. Who would have thought that before the fight had ended up happening? Robbie Davis Jr. versus Sergey Lipinets as well was a real good fight. But does Wardley versus Clarke stand out to be your fight of the year so far? Angelo Lea with a great win as well too against Bernardo Lopez. Does Wardley versus Clarke take your fight of the year so far?
From that list you've read out, from the fights I can think of, that probably would be top of the list as far as fight of the year goes. Round of the year goes to Joe Laws and Stephen McKenna, by the way. I mean, what a first round that was back in Barnsley a couple of weeks ago. I was good enough to be there for seconds out, complete on my feet for the whole 3 minutes. Absolutely ridiculous first round. But fight of the year, I think, probably goes that way.
Fury Usyk too.
Fury Usyk too. I was about to say
Yeah.
it certainly could be trumped there at the last moment in the last couple of weeks of the year. There's some big fights to come, so I think that we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to crown our fight of the year, Ayman.
Fair enough. And finally, as we move on to just a bit of an impromptu topic here, because it happened, the press conference happened last night over in America. That is Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul. It's happening. We thought maybe because of an injury, they might curtail this conversation, this exhibition, this fight between the two. Legend that is Mike Tyson back into a boxing ring at the age of 58, I believe it is. Closer to his 60s now, is taking on viral sensation Jake Paul, who did have the favor of boxing fans, hardcore boxing fans, after sort of doing the whole crossover influencer scene, started being the birth of that, along with his brother Logan Paul. Then sort of curtailing that and thinking, you know what, I want to help fighters out. I want to start my own promotions, MVP promotions. I want to start managing fighters. I want to bring in like Amanda Serrano, Ashton Silva, who of course was on the end of a bad KO of the year contender. But I want to start bringing these type of fighters in. I want to help push Amanda Serrano so she can be on my undercards and she can get the spotlight that she hasn't got so far and get the paydays that she hasn't got so far. And then he's started fighting, professional fighters. It's not the most high profile of people, but the idea was that he was going to be on the proper path of a professional fighter and not entertain these gimmick type of fights. But that doesn't seem to have worked so far. I don't think the broadcasters have enjoyed that offering. I don't think the numbers have been coming in as they were coming in when he did fight influencers of his ilk, like the likes of Tommy Fury, who was a professional fighter, sure, but the Tyron Woodleys, that sort of crossover fights, Ben Askrens, those sort of nights were bigger nights. Diaz were bigger nights than what had been offered by the professional course. So Netflix have come in. Netflix have said, you know what? We want you versus Mike Tyson. And it's going to happen later on this year. And for what it's worth, Josh, from judging by the amount of cameras, the amount of phones in the audience, the amount of buzz this fight is getting, just how big of a platform Netflix is, this is probably going to be the biggest event of the year. This is probably going to be the biggest fight night of the year because of the spotlight it's going to get, because of the machine that's behind him, because of the two fighters involved in Tyson versus Jake Paul. But do you have the appetite for this fight, Josh?
Do I have appetite? No appetite for it whatsoever. And to be honest, I'm surprised there is so much appetite in the boxing world for this. I think many of the people that want to see this fight are fans that probably don't tune in week to week. They've seen the name Mike Tyson, they've seen the name Jake Paul, and yeah, they're just interested in seeing that fight, and they don't read into it any further from a sort of medical point of view of someone of Mike Tyson's age against someone like Jake Paul in his late 20s. That's dangerous for Jake Paul in one sense, that if Tyson still has the power, that is dangerous compared to the power that Jake Paul has previously felt. And on the other hand, we don't know what sort of state that Mike Tyson's really in. We see the 5-10 second clips on Instagram coming from Tyson of him hitting a bag or just doing some pads in the gym, and sure, he looks in good shape certainly for his age, but he hasn't taken a big right hook or a big uppercut or a huge shot in some time now. And just what's going to happen if and when Jake Paul lands multiple shots on Mike Tyson? Is that gonna be an issue down the line for him? We don't know how stable he is mentally, and it just worries me, to be honest, Ayman, that we're seeing these fights and there's so much appetite for them. I was sort of seeing the appetite for not misfits generally, but crossover boxing seemed to be dwindling a little. I remember early on when we were having those early sort of Jake Paul fights and the KSI fights, and when we had Tommy Fury against Jake Paul, the appetite was absolutely massive, and it was to our benefit on Seconds Out covering those fight weeks. They were absolutely huge, but the more recent ones don't seem to be attracting quite the same numbers, and I'm surprised that this has attracted the numbers it has. I don't expect boxing fans to watch this, but there is certainly sort of a section of the public that will be watching it, but it's not something that interests me.
Yeah, this is one of those moments where you kind of hope it's some sort of orchestrated type of event and got this sort of plan, and it'll be like this entertaining kind of night. But when you hear really that this is going to be actually a fight, and apparently Mike Tyson's calling for this to be an actual fight, you get a little bit worried. I think there is a way that something like this can exist in some form and still be competitive and still be entertaining, and that's if they went the route of it being point scoring. You went to outpoint your opponent as opposed to looking to knock them out. If they did something like that, there might be a way in where this can exist in this sort of form of Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson in a point scoring type of event. So, a lot of jabs are being used, a lot of kind of, neither of them are really kind of looking to the rules of the fight isn't you're supposed to knock out your opponent here. You're supposed to just gain as much points as possible. I think that might be a way in this can flourish. It was just a bit. I remember when Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. had that fight, and for me, it looked like Roy Jones Jr. knew how to operate under the terms of an exhibition. Mike Tyson, for me, looked like he was going as much as he could go for his age and how much his body could give. And that worries me a little bit as well, too, because I don't think Mike Tyson can really be involved in exhibition. I think he has to go, and I think he has to think in the mindset of this is a fight for me. And I think that will spur on Jake Paul to do the same thing, and Jake Paul will probably be able to cause more harm to Mike Tyson. I do get worried when, and I don't know if you remember this one, Josh, but this is always in the back of my mind when it comes to fights like this. Did you see Holyfield versus Vitor Belfort?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And that was just a sad, like, and you knew, like, going into that fight, I think it was held by Triller. Triller put on that fight. And boxing fans who had anything about them, who knew a bit about Vitor Belfort and MMA and about Evander Holyfield and how he was, and conversations interviewing him in the past, like, no real fit state to fight. No real reason for him to fight. And it was sad just seeing him get knocked down and seeing him get hurt and seeing him have to come up off the canvas so many years later after his professional boxing career had ended. Like, what was the need for him to do that? But it happened, and they seem to want to take the money as well too. There's got to be people better placed around them to handle that situation and say, no, Evander, you don't need this. Thankfully, I think it seems to be the case that he said that now. But Mike Tyson seems to be the one who has taken that opportunity, taken that money there to have this big event and big night. And what it could mean as well too is that if this is successful though, Josh, if Netflix do have a big rousing fight night where they get loads of subscribers, loads of pay-per-views, whatever it is, loads of eyes on the platform, which I imagine that they will, the appetite is going to be for this and not for traditional boxing. It'll be another nail in the coffin for traditional boxing, because if this garners the huge numbers like we're predicting, and yeah, sure, like we said, it's to our benefit too, but that means that the appetite for actual boxing diminishes, surely, and Netflix won't want to do. They won't want to try and get in for Fury versus AJ or Beterbiev versus Bivol 2 or whatever. They'll want to do Jake Paul versus Conor McGregor next and call it boxing, not actually go for traditional boxing. And that's the problem as well, I think, Josh.
Yeah, I think it would be huge for boxing to have a backer like Netflix on board, whether that's sort of streaming live action or even sort of a Drive to Survive type documentary show. We've seen what that's done for Formula One, and other sports have had it too. There's a golf show, I think it's called Full Swing, which I've watched on there, which is really, really interesting stuff. And I think generally documentary content has been huge for growing sports, and there isn't much out there on Netflix anyway, in terms of boxing, and it's obviously a huge subscriber base on Netflix, and it would be a big move for boxing to get some action on there, whether it is to be documentary or live. But yeah, as you say, if the appetite is there for something like a Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul, and I wonder who's the bigger draw in that fight as well. To be honest, I wonder who's actually drawing the most eyes, why people are actually tuning in or purchasing tickets. Are they going to see Jake Paul? Are they going to see how much Mike Tyson has left? I don't know what you think about that, Ayman.
Yeah, no, I think they're going to see Mike Tyson. I remember when I got to for Seconds Out, they sent me to Dubai to go watch Mayweather versus Deji, and I was kind of in my mind, I was thinking, you know what, I wasn't a big boxing fan back in the day when Mayweather was in his pomp, more towards the tail end of his career when he's fighting like Berto and all that. Um, I kind of followed boxing a little bit more, and I thought when I got to see the Deji fight, I was covering that one. I was thinking, you know what? It's kind of great to be able to watch Mayweather in some form and be able to see some of what he had left. And I'm sure he can carry some of that into this exhibition. And I'll get to see Mayweather dance and show the defense and things like that. And it'll be a nice moment. And it was a little bit. It was good. I did get those moments, and I got to see the big entourage that followed with it, and the entourage that bustled and bumbled through, and the Mayweather pads up close and personal. They were great little moments to see and to watch with my own eyes. But then it was a bit sad seeing someone who's a defensive mastermind, and he comes out of a fight with Deji with a bruised eye, and he's like, "Yeah, so what? I got caught. I'm a little bit slower. I'm a little bit, I'm not as fast as I used to be. This is a different career from my actual professional boxing career." And it was half full. It was also a half full arena too. The Mayweather fanfare never really kind of carried over. And he's someone who's very much kind of looking to kind of continue his relevancy by fighting the likes of Deji or a KSI or Logan Paul. And then I got the second bite of the cherry. I got to see him in the UK against Aaron Chalmers. And boy, if that Mayweather Deji one wasn't half full, this O2 Arena one or wherever it was, I think it was O2,
It was, yeah.
less than half full, and it was real bad. And I think Mayweather did like an impromptu press conference after the fact, and he stayed for about an hour, which was really cool. But he sort of kind of said like, I would have loved to have felt the love from the UK audience. And I think, to be fair, he kind of hurt himself a little bit because one, it wasn't the best of promotions and wasn't the best of intriguing fights either. But two, he never had a fight in the UK, and I think if he had a fight in the UK, if that Hatton fight was in the UK, then UK boxing fans would have had that bit more of a love for Mayweather and would have maybe followed through in bigger numbers to see Mayweather in action. But that's the intrigue here with Mike Tyson. I'd be going there, and if I was there covering it, I'd be going, this is great to see Mike Tyson in a ring for my own eyes, to see even a little bit of what he was like. Even I'm sure there'll be a moment where he can throw in some body shots and then pivot and come up with something else. And like, that's all I'd want to see here. I would selfishly want to see that with my own eyes. But that comes with it all the risk factor afterwards, because he's in with someone who's fresh and younger and can probably do damage to him. And it's a tough situation. It's a tough call to make. My call would be, if I was in charge, that the fight wouldn't happen. But I'm not the one with the call here. Jump into the chat. People are saying, would like to see Wardley versus Clarke 2 plus Dacres Atama on an O2 card for those of you in England. I agree with you, Thunder Road. DBQ1, are you a Yank? Says DBQ1, 2 Thunder Road. Larry Liston says, how can AJ versus Fury be next? Isn't Usyk supposed to rematch Fury first and lose? Yeah, it's saying after these fights, it'll be Fury and AJ next, after their respective fights. Unless the fights are predetermined, I don't see how a promoter can target a fight before the original fight has happened. Well, that's the influence. That's the conversation. That's some of the friction that's happened with Canelo. Canelo saying, hey, I don't want to talk about this fight with Crawford until I've done Belanga, whereas Turki Al-Sheikh is apparently saying here, look, these are the fights I want now. This is what I want to lock in with you now afterwards. Let's get this done. Turki Al-Sheikh has said on the stomping ground, I want AJ versus Fury next, regardless of the outcome of what their fights are. MB, Lewis Crocker versus Conor Walker was a good one. Indeed, it was a very good fight. DB Cooper 1 says, Netflix should be ashamed of themselves. Load of tosh. They were really desperate to rebrand and capture the so-called alpha male / UFC market. The UFC was good last weekend, though. I think that's another nail in the coffin too for boxing, is that the UFC and the UFC model has really skyrocketed over the last 20 years. It's a bit of a joke promotion at the start with some of the gimmicky type of fights, and it was once thought of that the UFC was a competitor to wrestling, and it just totally sprinted past WWE. WWE has now had a bit of a resurgence now, and it's coming into more of the pop culture viewing as it's on a bit of a climb. But the UFC is streaks ahead of wrestling right now. It's streaks ahead of boxing too. A little bit of a lull for it right now, but we'll see how the UFC Noche fight goes up against a Canelo Alvarez fight night as well too. But I think that model has served well because you've got someone who can dictate what the fights are, and if you don't have those fights, well, then you're not going to get used, or you're going to fall down the pecking order. This is your fight. I think Turki Al-Sheikh is trying to do the same thing without owning all the promotions and entities, trying to push his money through to make those fights. But right now, a little bit of friction as to the bigger names, as has been suggested earlier, but the smaller names are happy to take it on and engage because they haven't. It's been tough for Martin Piccoli to get a fight. It's been tough for Zhile Zhang to get a fight. Now that the money's there and the pay's there, the fighters are happy to take those tough fights that were there for a lot less money on the table. Larry Liston says more domestic fights solves that. Netflix and Amazon is great platforms, but without a build-in boxing audience, the sport won't last long in the influencer era. Big Chungus as well is worried too. There are some great shows on Netflix. Name them, Big Chungus. DB1, I'm in the Bob Arum school of thought when it comes to UFC. Sure, it's ahead, but the UFC hype has died out big time. I think it's still pulling in big numbers, though. The hype's not there with the likes of, McGregor not being in the ring, Brock Lesnar being massive stars, Overeem and Ngannou, they've lost, who's dropped the bag. But it's up and down, but I think they've maintained a high enough level, a level that's higher than boxing that they're operating at anyways. So I think it's definitely streaks ahead for the moment. But maybe boxing will have a bounce back. It definitely needs it. We've come up to 5 p.m., so we're going to close out and roll out the end of the show. And we're going to close the poll. And the poll is as follows. The question that we asked you guys is, which fight do you want to see the most? Fury versus Anthony Joshua, another fight, Canelo versus Crawford, or Tank versus Haney? And it's happened in that order. 7% Tank Haney, Canelo Crawford 11%, other 14%. Fury versus Anthony Joshua with a resounding win. 66% of the votes in the voting poll. Josh, what do you think about that? And was that where your vote would have gone?
Yeah, my vote would have gone there for sure, Ayman. All British fights are obviously going to sell on a British stream. You have to say here on SO Live, but by far the most interesting of the options that we had laid out. A huge heavyweight fight, a fight that's been on the fans' lips for near enough a decade now, and a fight I still hope. We talked about it earlier in the show, so if you did miss the early parts of the show, go back and watch our discussion on Fury versus AJ, and if we think it will happen and when it will happen, but a fight that I hope, if not think, will happen at some point.
Wicked. That calls the curtain down another edition of Seconds Out Live. Thank you so much for everyone who joined in and listened to the show and contributed to the live. Some of the names here: DB Cooper One, Big Chungus, Larry Liston, Paul Daniels, Agni Kai Never Dies, Thunder Road. I'm sure I said DB Cooper One, Carl Franklin, Michael M, Arise Champion, Richard Stony Island. Some of the few names that have joined in. Sunset was in there as well too. Thank you so much for joining in. If you haven't already, click the like button, subscribe, and share. We'll be covering all the boxing news and events and the latest in the world of boxing this week. No big fights to look forward to this weekend, but we're coming back with the boxing action next weekend and into September. But as is customary, as always, Josh Green, who is in the hot seat, co-host hot seat, has the last and final word. Josh, what would you like to say to the millions tuning in and the millions watching at home?
I'd like to apologise for my video seemingly freezing for the past few minutes. So I apologise for what you've had to look at for however long it's been up there, because I only realised a few minutes ago. But I think it's the best way to close out the show is by wishing Mr. Flex and his Flexency once again a happy birthday. I can't. What is he? 27 years of age today.
I think it's 23.
23. So yeah, happy birthday once again to Danny. We hope you've all enjoyed what we've come up with on SO Live today, and I'm sure Danny will be back in the hot seat next Monday. So be there at 4 p.m.